before this game even launched, it was already making rounds online. The developer marketed it around a bizarre hook. You can beat enemies in a survival horror game, perform WWE-style finishers on them, and then dance over their bodies. An absurd and unexpected twist that quickly went viral. I cannot think of another traditional survival horror title that leans into something like that. And that wasn't the only thing that caught my attention. Before release, the developer offered limited edition skins bundled with the game for donations of $25 to $100. These cosmetics were framed as exclusive and would not be available after launch. Technically, they were not being sold in the traditional sense since the payment was positioned as a donation. Still, the exchange was tied directly to in-game content and was limited in availability. The game is currently priced at $10. That means access to those limited costumes required paying significantly more than the game itself. And as we get into this review, some issues further complicate how that pricing feels. But enough about the bundle controversy. Is Welcome to Dolltown actually good? So let's break it down. I'll walk you through what the game is about, how it presents itself visually, how it feels to actually play, how it's structured, the music, the issues I ran into, and whether or not it feels ultimately worth your time and money. In Welcome to Dolltown, you play as Yumi, a student who takes a part-time job at a local convenience store and slowly finds herself pulled into something darker beneath the surface of Dolltown. The story unfolds largely through Franjon, the only child seemingly left in town. He narrates much of the backstory through flashbacks. Franjon is the brother of Mio, the girl at the center of the town's tragedy. The town once prospered because of a master doll maker, their father, who created highly sophisticated lifelike dolls. The entire town revolved around his work, and that prosperity shifted into obsession. Mio became a focal point of attention in a way that felt unhealthy, and the town's relationship with the doll maker's success began to twist. The themes move into darker territory as the story progresses. The Silent Hill inspiration is clear in the fog, the small town isolation, and the introspective tone. At the same time, the exaggerated combat gimmicks and tonal shifts give it a strange identity that doesn't fully settle into pure survival horror. The game uses a stripped-down, lo-fi 3D style with a heavy psychological horror atmosphere, reminiscent of early PS2-era survival horror titles. There's a subtle gothic edge to its presentation, dull-like character design, muted tones, and isolation baked into nearly every space. The palette stays washed out, and the heavy fog keeps the world feeling closed in. Lighting is simple and subdued, giving everything a slightly lifeless look. Aside from the dancing and wrestling gimmick, the aesthetic was what initially drew me in. The fog is extremely heavy. You can barely see more than a short distance in front of Yumi. I understand the stylistic intent, but it often feels obstructive. The colors are so muted that Yumi's red costume can look almost black while walking through town. Interior spaces have similar visibility issues. Some areas, like the school, are so dark that navigation becomes very frustrating. The fixed camera angles amplify this issue. There were moments where I genuinely couldn't tell where I was supposed to go. Yumi has a phone in her bag, and when you inspect it, it says you can use the flashlight, but the game doesn't let you do that. Combat is simple. You have a 3-hit combo. You can guard, and if you time it just before an enemy attack connects, you can parry. After a successful parry, you're able to perform a special kick. The dancing and WWE-style finishers are flashy and are clearly the viral hook for this game. However, mechanically, they don't add depth to the system. I initially tried playing with the controller, and it works, but there are issues. There isn't a dedicated controller settings section in the main menu. You're left guessing what each button does. I switched to keyboard and mouse, which felt more responsive. Movement is standard WASD, right-click to guard, left-click to attack, and spacebar triggers finishers. There are dedicated emote buttons, including the dance. There's also an inventory screen similar to what you'd find in a Silent Hill game, but I never actually used it. There are no consumable items at all in the game, and there's no way to heal, and there's a reason for that. The game is very linear, despite taking place in a town with multiple areas. It autosaves at certain points, so deaths don't send you far back. There isn't much combat overall in the game, at least in my playthrough. Most of the experience consists of exposition and walking between story beats. There's also no accessible map in the in-game menu. You have to find maps posted around town, and you cannot take them with you. With the town already covered in heavy fog, That becomes very bothersome. Progression involves simple puzzles and key hunting, some of which don't clearly point you in the direction of your objective, so you can end up wandering around unsure of where to go. The game has no voice acting and relies heavily on dialogue to deliver its story. Unfortunately, there's a lot of padding in this game. Many sections force you to walk very slowly. One NPC even speaks for an extended period of time, and if you try to rush through the dialogue, it makes you sit through it at the intended pace. While the game is technically horror, it rarely builds sustained tension. There are jump scares and unsettling dolls, and the themes are dark, but I never felt genuinely stressed. It feels closer to a narrative-driven horror experience than an action game. Near the end of the game, the genre even changes, further complicating its identity. Most of the memorable music appears during flashbacks. The tracks carry a melancholic, echo-heavy tone that evokes early Silent Hill soundtracks. Outside of those moments, the music is minimal and used sparingly. As for issues with the game, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. There's a lot of junk in the game. After defeating enemies, you're sometimes forced into slow movement. Alt-tabbing can cause the game to get stuck. You can also get stuck on objects or in corners, and in some cases, I had to quit the game to fix it. I encountered placeholder text that said "translation not found." The camera presents its own problems. You cannot manually zoom in or out, and in tight interior spaces, it can behave unpredictably. It clips and often makes it hard to see what's happening. There's also no dedicated sprint button. The game dictates when you walk and when you run. The lack of control over movement adds noticeable friction, especially during slow walk segments. The developer has stated that they were able to speedrun the game in around 40 minutes. For most players, it will likely take 2 to 3 hours. My first playthrough took me about 2.5 hours. Beating the game unlocks New Game Plus, though it doesn't clearly explain what changes. At $10, the game is short but not unusually priced for an indie horror title. The concern comes from the limited mechanical depth, heavy padding, and technical roughness. When you factor in the pre-release limited edition skins that required donations significantly higher than the base game itself, the overall value becomes harder to justify. Don't get me wrong, there's a compelling aesthetic here. The town story and gothic presentation have interesting ideas behind them. There's also a solid base here, and for a solo developed game, it's clear a lot of effort went into building this world. It just doesn't feel fully realized yet. Because of that, I don't think Welcome to Dolltown is worth recommending right now. If you'd like to check the game out, the link is in the description. If you've played Welcome to Dolltown, I'd like to hear how your experience lined up with mine. We read all comments. And if you liked the video, considering leaving a like, subscribing to the channel, and sticking around for more. I'll see you in the next one.